Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host amazing guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. I'm Jeremy Goldman, Senior Director of Client Briefings at eMarketer, and today we'll be learning how to transform your customer data into a strategic asset and gain a competitive edge. I'm joined now by my special guests, Jennifer Fleck, Senior Principal Global Business Advisory at Slalom, Heather Roth, Director Digital Strategy, also at Slalom, and Steve Zisk, Product Marketing Principal at Redpoint Global. Hey everyone, really excited for your presentation today.
Hey, Jeremy.
Glad to be here, Jeremy. Glad to see you again.
Yeah, this is going to be great, and I'm making that promise ahead of time because it's true I've gotten a little bit of a sneak preview. Afterwards, we're going to be opening it up for questions about what you've learned. So just use the chat window to submit questions for the Q&A and to communicate with your peers. So with that, Jennifer, what do you have on tap for us today? Let's get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you to everyone on the eMarketer team. We're very excited to be here chatting with everybody today. And of course, because we're consultants, we have to start with an obligatory data slide about how important what we're going to talk about really is. I'll say that we could put all kinds of statistics and quantifications of why customer data is important. But I'm guessing that if you're on this call and you're interested in this content, you don't really need to be convinced of the value of customer data. My guess is over the past year alone in your jobs, you've had, if not one, multiple conversations around customer data, the acquisition of customer data, how to manage it, how to resolve it, how to operationalize it. It's become a common thread in nearly every conversation that we have with our clients is really being able to harness the value of customer data. And that's really what we want to talk to you about today. But with the promise, this nirvana of being able to leverage customer data comes quite a few challenges. And I would say, the immediate fast follow of, data is super valuable. We really want it comes a, inevitable slew of here's all the challenges that we faced in trying to get to that ideal state of being able to collect and leverage our data. And so we have just a couple of the challenges here that we hear from our customers and our clients on a day-to-day basis. And they really fall into two big groups. On the left, you have, it's difficult to even collect data, to own our own data with the shifting landscape of first-party data strategy and ownership. And even once we have that data, it's really difficult to be able to resolve all of that complex and disparate and siloed data into a usable customer data profile or, single source of truth that really tells a story about that customer. And even if we figured that out, then we get to this whole privacy and governance challenge of data to be able to ensure that we're using data in a responsible manner, that we're able to adapt to an ever-changing regulatory landscape that is governing how that data can be collected and leveraged. And let's say we figured out that whole data collection and privacy thing, then we have to worry about everything on the right-hand side of the slide here, which is, well, what do we do with that data now? We have this complex data ecosystem and MarTech ecosystem. How do we ensure that our data can flow seamlessly through that? To our omni-channel delivery channels. So we've got 15, 20 different channels that we're trying to push data to for various messages. How do we ensure that that data gets to those channels in a seamless way? And then one new question, or I guess more of an opportunity we're seeing, is how do we leverage that data from a monetization perspective and make our data a crucial and valuable asset of ours? So what we really want to talk to you about today is taking all those challenges and giving you some of the tools and the ideas that we brought to our clients. We're going to talk about each one of these pillars, if you will. And if you look at this is really the customer data life cycle. On the far left here, we're going to talk to you about how to evolve data collection and ownership strategies. We're going to talk to you about how best to ensure that you're complying with privacy standards and empowering users to have control over their data. We're going to talk about building flexibility into your technology stack, into your architecture to ensure that it's scalable in the future. And we're going to talk to you about delivering those meaningful customer experiences. And of course, we would be remiss as consultants if we didn't talk about leveraging the power of AI and ML kind of across this entire stack and what AI has done for us in the past and what we can now do with generative AI technologies that are starting to emerge. So this will really be the core of the rest of the presentation. We'll touch on each one of these. And then as Jeremy mentioned, we'd love to chat with you at the end there. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Heather and she'll talk to us about data collection and ownership.
Great. Yeah, if I think about this diagram right here, I would just highlight the evolved data collection and ownership piece because that is step number one to any of this. Because anything else on this and probably on many people's plates right now are going to be like data is so core and foundational. So we hear a lot of our clients talk about like we need to have really great hyper personalization. There's been a number of conversations, and this is probably on everyone's radar this year around cookie deprecation, right? And then the commercialization of AI, to Jen's point, AI has been around, but it's really around right now. It has opened up the conversation for ownership of customer data because I think a lot of companies really took a step back and they were like, wow, like we're kind of getting a lot of our intelligence from something that we don't own. And so we really want to start to think about how do we actually own a lot of this data? How can we activate on this? How do we uniquely like build the intelligence around our customers so that we can do this well? And that's been a big source of conversation with our clients this year. So when we think about the conversations on the next slide, we've really been trying to focus it with our clients around how can they start to build a data repository of data that their customers in many cases are explicitly providing to them. And sometimes it's not as easy in certain industries as it is in other industries, but we like to think about what are data that you can capture from polls, surveys, ratings, consented digital data when you have digital platforms, transactional data, loyalty data, subscription data, form submit data, all of those are really explicitly provided and should be the foundation for a lot of the data strategy that companies start to build. And for that reason, we've seen a lot of acceleration in data management solutions like customer data platforms, like our friends Redpoint here, as well as customer data warehouses, integrating CRMs, and then really focusing on identity resolution to Jen, what she was talking about earlier, and manage, like connect the data and manage it in a way that consistently allows companies to build a unified profile that's constantly changing, shifting, providing new intelligence, and just the foundational for a lot of the personalization, activation, and segmentation activities. We do also know that in some industries and just in general, there is a need to like go get data from other sources. Maybe it's an industry that doesn't have as much digital data as others might have, or it could be a heavily digital company that just wants to enrich the data for better addressability or targeting. And so we see a lot of enrichment come in, which is on the right, which is kind of that supplemental piece that we're working with. And that can be from third-party data sources. In many cases, we know credit card data and other data like transactional data from those sources can be really, really rich. But there's also a number of risk assessments and different things that have to come with that. We are also starting to see a proliferation of more second-party data, which would be a little bit more of those collaboration situations where you actually have like a handshake with somebody else to be able to do that too. And those are leading to a lot of investment in a number of different data clean rooms within the media and other space. But within this, we're starting to see a lot of that come together for companies in building kind of their more owned data. And so that's kind of the data inputs piece in here. There's still, like, as we think about the strategy conversations, it naturally flows into the conversations around how data is managed and used, because you have to, like, these strategies just have to be done together. So I'll say that a lot of companies within this diagram jump over to the right. It's really fun to think about the ways to orchestrate and activate and segment. But in many cases, marketing, data, and technology teams really need to be thinking about what's on the left, because that's going to be fundamental to making sure that anything is there. You have to have the right data. You have to be resolving those identities, managing it in some sort of data management or combination of data management tools, and then really, really thinking about the privacy of that data, because as interest in data grows and as you gain more data, there's more and more regulations coming out to protect consumers' data. And all of these things, if they're done well, are going to give you really great activation opportunities to your audiences who have consented in, really good AI opportunities for audiences who have consented in. And you'll be able to do the right if you put some time in investing in the left. And so this is kind of just an easy way to think about here's what we need to focus on to be able to do a lot of those things that we want.
Yeah, in a way, what you're talking about is the stuff on the right is the outcomes that most people are looking for. But in order to really supercharge those outcomes and get the actual results you need, you have to do the initial legwork that you're talking about on the left.
Yeah, and I don't think not all of the work has to be done on the left. I will say privacy does, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but you don't have to have everything figured out to be doing what you want to do to the right. There's incremental ways that you can do that, but there has to be a big strategy around the stuff on the left and the right foundations to be able to deliver a lot of those things that I know are in kind of the marketing Spotify wrapped terms this year of personalization, AI, and a number of those things. Well, with the interest in customer data comes skepticism as well from probably your consumers on what companies are going to do with the data. And comes legislation around how to keep consumer data safe. So the privacy element is a key part of what we think about and talk with our clients about within this space too. Because starting with GDPR in 2018, it has just been a number of regional, state, industry, and even AI-specific legislation that's come out. And so as the person who's often focused on the data our clients can capture to do the cool things on the right, I'm fortunate to be surrounded by our global responsibility and privacy team at Slalom to keep me in check and help me understand how do we actually also make sure that we're de-risking businesses from being able to do this. So when we think about building out our data strategy, there's a few main areas that we really want to make sure that our clients are focusing on. First one is ensuring that the right compliance mechanisms are in place with the right consent management strategy and with opt-out capabilities. That's just so critical. Consumers more and more are going to want opt-out capabilities. Even Google is going to be allowing consumers to opt out too. I think there's also the ability to resolve data deletion and portability requests very quickly. That can set up a ton of risk for companies if they don't have an easy way, if a customer requests to delete all data, to delete it from everywhere. And when we know that a lot of disparate systems are in play, that can be really challenging. And it's a really big focus area that companies need to be thinking about with their data strategy. Also, very clear definitions around sensitive information, having a data dictionary that everyone is consistent on so that when different people are working on different things, it's just fundamentally known within the organization. And then obviously, as I kind of talked about a little bit, standards for third-party access to data for some of those enrichment use cases that we talked about earlier. So the next slide, I have kind of just like a quick checklist of takeaways for this audience to think about to get that right level of security around the data and ensure that you all stay within compliance. And a big piece of it is transparency and privacy language. That's just going to be really critical. And people do read those things. Centralized consent management. We work with a lot of companies, especially multi-brand companies who don't always have centralized consent management. And that could be a game changer in many ways, again, because you want to have some of those deletion requests pretty standard. Data minimization, again, we want to do really cool things, but only collecting what we need to collect is going to de-risk a lot of the potential situations as well. Flexibility to change consent preferences. And then I'll say also kind of the real-time updates wherever the data is stored is also going to be really critical. Third-party compliance, so thinking not just about GDPR and everything like that, but PCI, anything with the FTC. There's a lot of regulatory things that each industry is going to have to think about. And then audit trails, I think, are going to be really key. And then one thing that I will also call out is there are some things on the data management side that anyone who has a lot of their data stored in a data warehouse primarily, and we're seeing a lot of that, are really going to need to be thinking about the most primary one being tagging and metadata per consent within the data warehouse, and just making sure that if somebody does change anything, it is immediately moving to the data warehouse, and within the data warehouse, those records have metadata tags or flags that indicate what the customer consent is. Like if it's marketing approved, great. That they can be used in segmentation. If it's AI approved, if it's functional approved, those pieces in there are going to allow for just better management of the data. And that's really, really critical for companies who are building out their customer data within a data warehouse and maybe leaning a little bit more into the composable architectures, which I know Jen's about to talk about. But it's
Before we get there, though, Heather, all of this is great information. This is very much focused on what do we need to do as an internal organization to make sure that we're sort of covering the bases in terms of compliance and privacy. There's one other thing I'd love to hear you talk about a little bit, which is the more externally facing. There's essentially an implicit contract between us as marketers and the customer themselves, a value exchange, if you will. And a lot of what you're talking about here internally is driven by that value exchange. Are you okay with talking about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, Steve, I think about it as like an overlapping Venn diagram of the customer experience. So in the middle is the customer experience. On the right is the activation and the cool things. Like people want personalized experiences. They want to have targeted ads. They want to have hello, Heather, not hi there in an email, right? Like there are a lot of those things that consumers expect when working with a company. On the left side is the privacy pieces, allowing flexibility, allowing them to opt in and opt out and change things as needed. And those together are what create kind of that modern customer experience. And that's why each of these things is so important, right? Like the transparency in the language, the centralized piece, and the ability to have flexibility into that is just going to allow consumers to opt in and opt out of different things that they want and they don't want based off of if I want personalized experiences, I need to select that I want those things. If I want targeted ads, then I need the control to be able to do that. And so I think that's where those two things come together.
That all makes great sense. And I would point out that sort of buried in what you're saying, most people, when they think of a personalized experience, they're not necessarily thinking of, oh, I'll let you simply personalize ads. They have a customer journey. They want to be met by us as brands through all of the phases of that journey with information, with coaching, with trustworthy ideas, with peer insights. There's a whole bunch beyond just dropping a piece of content or dropping an ad in front of somebody that has to be done right.
Yeah, and it's a thing that as we think about personalization with our clients, we really think about like what are those personalized experiences that you want to give your customers and that your customers want. And then it's really breaking down what is the data that you need from that. And then how can you encourage the customer to give you that data in order to deliver that value back. And how you actually make those personalized experiences valuable to encourage them to give you the data.
Yeah. Sorry for the interrupt, but you were starting to hand it over because a lot of this is driven by composable technology. So we can hand it back to Jennifer to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our kind of buzzwords that we're throwing into this presentation, we're going to add another one. So composability. This is again probably a topic or a concept that you've heard in the last year or so. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's really about how do we take these data foundations that we now have through collection, data privacy management, how do we start activating that data in a future-proof and in a scalable way? And this is really where we get to the concept of composability. So if we go to this next slide, we're going to try and maybe break down some of the confusion because, one of the things we talk about, clients come to us and say, well, we want to explore composability, composable CDP, but they really fundamentally don't understand what that means. And first thing I'll say is composable is more of an approach to an architecture. It's not specific to CDP or data systems. We work with clients a lot who are working towards composable commerce, composable content, if you've heard about headless content management systems. And essentially, the idea with composability is moving away from monolithic software. So software that is kind of bundled into a single solution that has multiple capabilities built within it. And instead trying to move towards an architecture where that is a decoupled, interoperable solution where maybe you have point solutions that are now doing the different jobs that was traditionally under this umbrella of this monolithic software. So in concept, it's really taking something that was bundled before and sort of debundling it and finding best in class solutions to kind of fill those different capability voids that you would have. We're going to be talking about composable data platforms because this is a customer data presentation. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is and is not composable. So the way that we define composable is an approach to architecture that leverages the enterprise data warehouse as the source of truth to power solutions that would be traditionally provided in a CDP, a monolithic CDP. So when you look at, is something a composable data platform? We have a few little, sniff test checks to say, is it composable? Is it not? So the first, and I think this is sort of the hallmark of composable data platforms, is where does the data live in your architecture? And if the answer is it lives in the data warehouse, that is the source of truth. And this is sometimes called zero copy architecture or minimal copy architectures. So that means all your data is living in your data warehouse and all of your tools that kind of sit on the activation side of that are interacting with data, but that data stays in the data warehouse. So I think that's the first kind of check. The second is it modular? Is it decoupled? Can we leverage point solutions? So can we take something that was coupled before into a single solution and now start saying, hey, instead of using that analytics feature within that CDP previously, can we now leverage our own BI tool or our standalone analytics platform to plug into that architecture? Can we leverage maybe a complementary solution for something like identity resolution? Again, all of those systems need to be working together, but it's able to kind of move pieces in and out. And the last kind of, check mark there is this purpose built for the organization? So is the organization able to look at what are the business needs and what do we need this architecture and this solution to do, and choose different technologies to be able to slot into that architecture to cover different pieces of that. So this is really how we think about composable and composable data platforms specifically. The next question we usually get is, well, why would we go through all of this work of determining all these point systems and solutions? What are the benefits of composability or moving towards composable or a hybrid approach to architecture? And the first is really to be able to use what you have. There have been incredible amounts of investments happening over the last decade into organizations building up their internal data capability. So building out cloud data warehouses, building out their data science teams, ensuring that the data they have is managed correctly, as Heather was talking about, that it aligns with privacy standards and regulations. And this kind of architecture allows you to leverage all of that great work that's been done by IT and data teams by keeping that data the source of truth. So it's using what you already have and what you've already invested in. The second is there is a downstream time and cost savings. Well, we'll talk about this later. There is a kind of a bit of a mountain to climb when you're getting this type of architecture set up. Over time, you can create time and cost savings from an efficiency perspective, and also just bringing down the amount of compute that and processing that's happening within all of these additional downstream systems that were at one point or another having to house and manage data. The reduced security risk, this kind of goes back to the use what you have. So obviously, by keeping all your data in a centralized and clearly governed repository in that data warehouse, you're reducing the risk of data leaks. You're reducing the risk of having unauthorized persons having access to that data. Just keeping that in a very strict system is going to reduce security risks and obviously help in the long term with compliance issues. And then avoiding vendor lock-in. If you've ever invested or been in an organization that has one of these really big, heavy platforms, you know that to move away from them, even pieces of them, if you wanted to start, like the example I used before, leveraging your own analytics platform, it's very difficult to do that in these kind of scenarios. And it's by design to a specific point. So, once an organization that has one of these kind of monolithic solutions gets you in there, the idea is that you use their entire suite of products, right? And they make it easy to use that suite of products. But to move away from them can be complicated and can be time consuming. So having this composable architecture, in theory, will make it easier for you to kind of swap out different point solutions if new advancements in technology come along, or if you want to test a different solution in that architecture. And so the last question we often get is, okay, what does this actually look like? We're talking about it very theoretically. Show me what a sample architecture would look like. And I'm going to pass it to Steve, who's going to walk you through what a composable MarTech or composable CDP stack would look like with something like Redpoint at the center of it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jennifer. And just as a side note here, we really tend to think about composability at a couple of different levels. The first of those, which Jen alluded to quite a bit in the stuff that she was discussing a moment ago, is the MarTech stack itself. The whole point of having a MarTech stack is that each of the individual elements in that stack should serve the particular needs that you have for how you're communicating with your customers, how you're interacting, measuring, optimizing, monitoring what's going on. So at that level of composability, you may have a centralized CDP that itself is composable, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides here, but that drives the information that's required out to the individual channels as needed. So on this slide, you can see we've got a set of potential source data information coming in. It's being stored either by the CDP itself or because this is a composable stack, by other elements, whether that be something like dbt or Fivetran or something else, into your centralized cloud customer data warehouse. And then that information is being perfected, cleansed, identity resolution, aggregation is being applied, all kinds of other processes are being done in order to create that perfect unified customer record that can then be driven out to all of the different channels. So we're pushing data out to web and mobile and getting responses back, pushing data out to different kinds of event and service providers, outbound providers, marketing channels, and as Jennifer also talked about a little earlier, to modeling and analytics channels. The thing that I would point out here is that there's a process going on in all of this. And one of your measurements for am I doing composability right needs to be, are the people who are operating the composable stack in this kind of a process using the stack to make their lives easier, or is the stack perhaps something that's getting in the way? Are there too many handoff points? Are there too many different operations that have to be done manually in order for me to get the results that I want out in the channels? And to that last point, one of the solutions that people have been looking at for the last couple of years to making that process easier and to making various parts of it more automated is to add AI and ML into the process and to be able to leverage both the modern version of Gen AI and some other pieces of AI in order to improve the marketer experience. The marketer wants to improve the customer experience, but the marketer's own experience has to be smooth and easy for them in order to be able to interpret, optimize, measure, extend the customer experience across all the different pieces. And in talking about AI and ML, we need to recognize that AI and ML components are actually interacting with the customer data that we've been focusing on here in a number of different ways. One of them is that AI and ML itself, and if I break that down, it's not just the Gen AI that we've been talking about in 2023 and 2024, but we've been doing AI for many, many years. Both we at Redpoint and we at Slalom have been working with AI in terms of predictive models, prescriptive models, product recommendations, customer sentiment. Analyzing and understanding our customers better has been part of what we've done as organizations for many years. And that analysis really is improved by having much better data quality and identity resolution. Garbage in, garbage out is a very old saying, but it's very true about AI. If you make sure that the data that you're feeding into AI is accurate, representative of the customer, not biased, transparent, clean, then you're likely to get much better results than if any of those things are not true. The second step, of course, is that your AI or ML framework, whether it's part of what you're doing in marketing, your own chosen framework like a Databricks or Dataiku, or something that's native to the cloud like, let's say, Snowflake Cortex or Azure ML, those frameworks then need to work their magic, drive the models, drive the insights. That's often a different persona. You've got data engineers and data scientists who are working with the model in order to accomplish that. And then the output of that part of the process is accurate models and predictions that can tell us something about our customer. Are they more likely to buy? Are they going to churn? What products might they have affinity for? What sentiment might they have? Even things as detailed as what channel would they be most responsive to, or what time of day should we be messaging them? And those kinds of pieces of information really require appropriate orchestration and personalization that can respond to those models and interact with the customers in a way that's meaningful and valuable for the customer experience. And then, of course, as you're doing those kinds of interactions, you want to be able to measure the results. The model told me if I interact this way, I will get these results. Is that actually happening? Am I getting the results that I expected? Can I then feed that information back into the unified data profile and back into the model so that you can get this cycle, this round of information that allows me to improve what's going on with the model? And that point, that last point of being able to feed the data into the personalization engines, into the activation part of the CDP, and to drive results is the place where customer data activation, the last point that we wanted to talk about, becomes hyper important. And that data activation itself looks like a set of capabilities that you can see over on the right in this diagram. I promised you I would talk about composability at a slightly different level. If we're looking within the CDP itself, there's a series of tasks, capabilities, processes, sub-processes that I want to be able to do within my organization. And not everybody who's doing those is the same person. So I may have a data engineer or a data professional who's caring a lot about ingestion, hygiene and transformation, identity resolution, while the marketer at the other end of the spectrum cares about understanding who the customer is, building out and activating segments, orchestrating and guiding and providing content for outbound and triggered marketing, advertising, inbound and real-time marketing. And across those different personalities, across those different capabilities, we have a whole set of different people who really care about what's going on with the different pieces of a composable CDP and need to have different cuts, if you will, across that set of data that we've been driving out to all of the different channels and to all of the different users who care about it. With that, I want to remind us all that if we think about the data and we think about composable CDPs, we're really talking about interacting with both vendors and with people who can give you the thought leadership that's required and the implementation skills and the selection skills that are required. And we'd love to see you talk with us more, both now in terms of questions and after the session is done. So Redpoint and Slalom are very happy to work together to satisfy your needs for the best possible customer data and the best possible customer experiences. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jeremy to see what kinds of questions we have.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great, Jennifer, Heather, Steve. Thanks so much for sharing those great insights. I think it's an important topic, but very timely, especially as the people are thinking a little bit more about what are the initiatives that they're going to greenlight in 2025, right? So we've got quite a few questions. So let's get started, or jump right into that Q&A. Maybe this is a good question, Jennifer. I'll start with you, and maybe if you all want to jump in. How do you get started? I think this is a good, very simple, but yet not simple at all question, because it seems like if people are thinking about vendor selection and how to go about this process, it seems it might be daunting for some decision makers, no? So how would you get started?
So first of all, I absolutely agree. This can be a very daunting prospect when you just look across this and say, wow, there's so much that needs to happen to even get to an activation. Where do I begin? So I think there's two thoughts I have. The first, I would caution to ensure that you're starting with business need and business value before you start talking about what technology do we need and what data do we need. I can't tell you how many conversations that I'm in where, huge investments have been made in technology, and then someone's asking the question, well, how does this ladder up to what we're trying to do as a business? How are we showing value? How are we moving the needle? And you're trying to kind of reverse engineer the things you've already bought into what you should be doing. So I would say start with a business value, understand what that is and where your organization is trying to go, then get down to the level of developing the use cases and the capability needs that you have, and then start thinking about, okay, this is what we want to do. These are the use cases we have. What technology do we need to be able to deliver those experience, whether it's composable architecture, whether it's something else, and what data do we need and how is that going to work? So I think that's absolutely number one. The second caution I would have is, we probably have a lot of marketers on this call. This type of initiative is not something that marketing can do in a silo anymore. Whether or not you're moving towards composable, if you want to start leveraging customer data in these kinds of seamless sort of life cycle ways, you need to get IT on board with what you're doing. You need to have data science and your data teams on board with that too. You need to make sure that these initiatives are prioritized across the organization. Because again, another thing I hear is, marketing's really pushing on this initiative. They really want this, but if IT and data isn't along for the ride and they're not helping move that forward, it really becomes dead in the water and it's really hard to push things. So, focus on business needs and get all of your stakeholders aligned before you even, kind of get to the what are we doing phase.
I think that's a great insight, Jennifer. And you talked about it a little earlier when you were talking about matching use cases to the data. I would emphasize that Customer 360 is a long-term journey. It's not a thing that you have to build right now. The goal should be get the data that you need to drive the use cases you need. And the second half of that is treat it as a journey. You want to start thinking of yourself as an agile marketer. Start with a smallish set of use cases, but prepare for success. And remember that you're going to follow on the initial use cases with more work. I will tell you that one of the big things that one of my analyst friends talked about is the really high number of marketers who have a CDP but have very low utilization of the CDP. They've done a use case, 2 use cases. Great, I'm done with the CDP. Let's go on to something else. Get real value out of the CDP by looking for the next set of use cases and by promoting what you're doing, communicating the success that you're having with not just the IT team, but with all of the different teams who care about what you're doing, all the way up to the CXOs.
The one thing that I'll add to that, because I agree with a lot of what y'all are saying, I think in many cases it's also starting with the customer experiences that you want to create. I think and I hope that there's no one sitting in a leadership discussion saying, I want to create a bad experience. Like in many cases, the customer experience is the great equalizer when you think about the number of different stakeholders involved. When you're saying, what do we want to do? And in many cases, the business, marketing, or other parts of the business are driving that. But then they get to have the discussion with the other parts of the organization on like what's realistic now, what's realistic in the future. To Jen's point, how does this align to what we're trying to do with our strategic goals, whether it's acquisition, retention, starting to grow the value of existing customers, and then starting to think about that as kind of the backlog of use cases too. We often run workshops with our clients to help them think through this, whether it is just customer data strategy, whether it's related to personalization, identity, et cetera, where it all starts with kind of like, what are these experiences that you want to create across your customer's journey with you? What does that mean for the data that you need? And then you can see how the privacy and the identity pieces can come into that. Do you have it? Is it accessible? Do you have to build something? And then starting to say, like, what are some of the incremental things that we can do now? And what do we have to build towards later? And in many cases from that, that's when you get to say, like, okay, my email is going to say, hi, Heather, instead of hi, customer. And that's like a win for us. But it's a win that they could knock off while they're kind of building towards the next ones. And so that, I think, to your point, Steve, is when you can start showing wins and communicating those things, that's how it happens. But I really do think it starts with everybody getting aligned on like, how do we want to invest in the customer experience moving forward? And then how can our teams come together to do that?
I think, building on some of what you just said, Heather, and maybe you want to start with this one or feel free to pass it around. You discussed a lot of use cases for CDPs for marketing and for retail. How does this apply to my highly regulated healthcare needs? I think that, by the way, that's a great one because we do the same thing with our coverage. We silo healthcare and FinServ because they have different regulatory needs, and you can't cover all these things in the same way. I imagine you can't be thinking about your tech stack in the same way either.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all. So like while templated approaches are easy, we often don't do that. And I think the process is still the same, right? Like it's starting with that experience, regardless of the industry. And we work a lot with like healthcare, financial services, federal agencies, et cetera, still doing these sorts of things because everybody does want to figure out how do I optimize my marketing spend? How do I think about giving my consumers, my members, my residents, a good experience within that. And it still does start with that. And it still does start with like breaking those things down and connecting the dots. I think where the differences end up is the solution stack. So when we start to identify those experiences, the data requirements, we overlay a lot of the privacy pieces. To your point, Jeremy, of like there is industry level legislation coming out on a frequent basis by state, et cetera. So there's a lot of those points that have to be thought about. And then we can start to say, what does this mean for the solutions that you have right now? How you might need to optimize it, like adding some of the metadata tagging into your data warehouse, like I was talking about earlier, or even like, does this need to shift over to a private cloud? But I think within that, the process is still the same. The output just ends up being different and a little bit more tailored to the specific needs. But that's why the process is so important.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would add is in healthcare in particular, but also in many other industries, the journey may not be a buying journey. You may have a customer in healthcare who is a patient who needs care management or who needs to research a condition or who needs to sign up for a PCP. So making sure that you understand how your journeys are going to interact with that customer and what kinds of outcomes you really want to have becomes really important. It's not all about marketing, offers, selling.
So we actually had a question that leads kind of I think you kind of set us up for this one, right? Because, when people think about CDP, they often think about B2C and how to get, true views and, really make sure that you can get better engagement out of your client base, let's say. But how can this be applied for B2B businesses? Everything that you presented, is there a similar use case, let's say for B2B versus B2C, or are more implementations, let's say, B2C oriented?
So we see B2B, and so certainly I would say more common in B2C, but it's actually interesting. I'm working on a B2B organization right now that is working on developing their use cases, and they're specific to sales enablement. So, obviously these big organizations selling to other businesses, how do you empower sales teams with better information, account level information, and trends and different data points for them to be able to better target their personalized communications that they're sending to other businesses or doing outreach, sort of knowing where different businesses are in the sales cycle and being able to leverage things like AI that are built into some of these CDP platforms to use the same types of things. So predictive modeling, typically like it has a B2C context, but can also be leveraged in a B2B environment to be able to understand more life cycle type of marketing. So sales enablement is an area that we're seeing a lot at those sort of B2B use cases and value.
And
I,
a couple of things on tech. One is that B2B journeys tend to be much longer and more complex journeys. So to Jennifer's point, one of the things that you need to be able to do is to track a broader set of touch points, a broader set of metrics for what customer engagement looks like. The other point in B2B is that there's usually a web of buyers, and therefore what you're doing with identity resolution really needs to cover organizational structure and interactions among buyers and intent on a team level, not just on an individual level. Make sure your CDP is capable of handling those kinds of relationships, not just the pure identity.
That's exactly where I was going. We're starting to see a lot of innovation and discussion in identity resolution around that, because even within B2B organizations, like you may want to personalize your interactions with different roles within that organization. So even if you have that parent account and you have some child accounts under that, like having the flexibility to know what needs to go there and having the ability to do that within a householding structure is really important. Because if you think, like, we work with a lot of tech companies, right, who maybe they're trying to reach out to both me and Jen, as tech companies sometimes do, and they want to personalize different messages to us. Or if we go to their website or their partner portals or anything like that, they'll want to give us personalized for personalized experiences, right? And so I think it's still important to be thinking about the data strategy and that identity strategy within a B2B landscape too, and then understanding how your CRM and any sort of CDP need to interact, if that is in fact what you need. If you need a CRM and a CDP, and in some cases you may not, and in some cases you definitely will, kind of depending on the structure of the B2B organization and what you're trying to do.
So I think we've got time for just about one more, unfortunately, but this might be a little bit of an easier kind of, I don't know, yes or no, or I know this is such a nuanced topic, but does composability have a downside in terms of how you activate your data?
My short answer is yes. And the reason is that as you decompose your stack into more and more pieces, into a whole bunch of different teams, a whole bunch of different pieces, a whole bunch of different user interfaces. You've now exchanged that best of breed that we talked about before for needing to coordinate what's happening across all of those different activation points.
think from my perspective, kind of building on that, Steve, it's maybe not a question of is there a downside? I mean, there are pros and cons to both, but the questions and what we ask our clients more is, are you a good candidate for a composable architecture? And some of the prerequisites definitely exist there. And I think having a strong uh, data practice within your organization, one that is relatively mature or has a roadmap to maturity. If your source of truth is going to be your cloud data warehouse, then it has to be in good working order. Same thing that we always say, bad data in, bad data out, right? So that has to exist. I think from the points I was making before, IT, data, marketing, sales, all of your stakeholders have to be bought in on the concept of composability and have to be bought in that this is going to be potentially an uphill for a while we figure this out. And we're going to have to maintain these different systems and ensure that everybody is bought into that concept in the short term, and in the long term. So those are some of the things and then also, where, ensuring that where these different capabilities are going to happen in this new architecture. If identity resolution is no longer going to happen within a monolithic CDP, who's doing identity resolution now? Is it happening in the data warehouse? Or you're bringing on a point solution to do something like that? So making sure that you're not missing any pieces. From a capability perspective, I'd say those are kind of the three big prerequisites for, should I even be having these conversations now?
Yeah, and then I think it just goes back to having the strategy around like the experiences that you want to create and having everyone bought in, right? Because that's how composability is going to work and how you avoid having people go in different places, how you make sure that you're managing and identifying some of those big questions like where is identity resolution going to happen ahead of time so that everything is coming together into a well orchestrated experience for the end users and customers.
Well, speaking of a well-orchestrated experience, Jennifer, Heather, Steve, thank you again for this great content and answering all of the questions from our audience, as many as we could get to. We really appreciate it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. And before we wrap up, let me just take a quick second to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. We've got some great stuff going on. Visit eMarketer.com to register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars and sign up for our newsletters. And don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. So just keep an eye on your email for the link to today's playback. And of course, feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again to Jennifer, Heather, Steve, the team at Redpoint Global, and our eMarketer studio team, who is about a 12 out of 10 behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.